So that was the first production that you actually directed?
Taking Steps
Taking
was.
Steps was? How was that different? I've done television directing, a lot of television, and some of it dramatic, and I've been in community theater productions. But I've always wondered about that difference between being a director and being an actor, and whether you're a better director because you are an actor or the other way around.
It's not the first show I ever directed. It's first I directed for Park Square. I was a high school theater director for 4 years and directed like 30 shows.
Yeah.
And then directed a whole bunch of Shakespeare shows with a Shakespeare company that I had for a few years.
Where is there you were a high school director in that you taught high school.
I taught high school,
Okay.
yeah.
Right.
And that's kind of where I cut my teeth on it. And actually, I found that to be a great training ground for directing. I had already been an actor for a while, but I learned the craft of directing as a craft before it had to be reviewed and you had to be held up to some standard of how it was going to be a piece of art. And I tried to be as good as I could with it, but it was mainly about learning the mechanics. And yes, I feel that having been an actor, and particularly one-man show comic actor, where there's a lot of give and take with the audience, a lot of rhythm with the audience, it's sort of in my system. And when I go to direct a scene, I can sense, there's like a sixth sense of like what the rhythm should be, and it's come in really very handy.
You know, this was a question I really was going to save for the end, but you've already given me a segue, so I'll take it.
Sure.
When I think of acting, I usually think of the ensemble thing. There are a lot of people up on stage. You're working together, but you do a lot of one-man shows. What's your fascination with? And is there an advantage in your own thinking in terms of doing the one-man shows?
Well,
you write them. You act in them. You direct yourself in them.
I stopped doing that after a while. I tried to do it.
Oh, really?
It's hard.
So somebody else actually directs you?
Yeah. It's two different things. An ensemble show is about creating an illusion of that the audience is coming in and peeking into a world, and they're seeing all this interaction. The characters are three-dimensional, very deep and rich usually if it's a drama, and so it's a very different thing. The one-man show, for me, the impulse was I wanted to tell a story. I had a story, actually the story of teaching the high school. And I wanted to tell this story, and I thought if I could sit and bore people over beers, or I could write it out and have it be a nicely crafted piece so that it could have a flow and an arc and a beginning, middle, and end. But eventually, once I got it written and revised and revised and revised and then rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed, when I stepped out to do it in front of the audience, it felt again like I was just talking to somebody. But it was a very tightly crafted journey that we were both on. And so I felt that's my attraction to one-man shows. It's not entirely about self-aggrandizement, because you are the only. It's about storytelling and connecting, and that's what my appeal.
I have a question that I've been dying to ask you since I read some things about you earlier today, and that is you talk about story, how important story is, and that you have to tell the story well, and that there are certain ways to tell a story well. And I was wondering if you would weigh in on that a little bit.
Yeah, there's ways to tell a story well and ways not to.
Okay.
And what we end up dealing with in theater, which is a little different from when you are creating the story from scratch, is that we're dealing with an existing piece that someone else already thought out how this would be told. Our job in theater then, as a director particularly, becomes how am I going to make sure that the main points of this story are transferred to the audience, and that the rhythm of it is right, and that we settle down when we need to settle down, we speed up when we speed up, and that all of that becomes the storytelling process, not just the words on the page. I recently directed Mulan, the big Disney musical for children's theater, and that was a big issue with that, because the story is actually quite a bit clearer in the animated film than it was in the script that we started out with. So my whole process became about how do I make sure that, especially for 6, 7-year-olds, that they're understanding what's going on, and it doesn't get obscured and weird and hard to follow. So.
Is it kosher to alter the script as you're getting ready for the production?
No.
Okay.
You can with permission, and we did some of that with Mulan. A little bit here and there. It's usually not. I mean, it's usually pretty. And being a playwright myself, and you don't want people messing with the words.
But directors cut
They cut. That's different.
That's okay, sure.
Yeah. I mean, technically it isn't, but and some authors are very tight about you can't even cut. But like with Shakespeare, a lot of people are, there are no real rules because nobody's got royalties to Shakespeare. Yeah. It's generally accepted that cutting is fine, but you don't alter a word.
You don't change the words.
The songwriter's talking story here.
That's what I want to talk about.
We need to talk about this play.
That's what I
Howard.
wanted to bring us
okay.
back
I
to.
really do.
I wanted to bring us
come
back to the
that.
play. Obviously, it's based on Conan Doyle's famous famous detective, but it's not based on any specific work by Conan Doyle. Without giving too much, you know, it involves, I know, Lily Langtry and Oscar Wilde, and without giving too much away, could you tell us a little bit about the plot or the story?
Yeah, it's actually based, as far as I know, largely on this play that you mentioned before, this original The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, I think it was called, where that play, which I think might have been in the 20s or so, encapsulated a lot of Sherlock Holmes' kind of hallmark things in this one play. So she took that and incorporated quite a bit of that into a completely made-up story. That
We're talking Katie Forget.
Katie Forget, yes, yeah. And this was written like just a couple years ago, so she
Where
was
does she
riffing
live?
on it.
She live here?
Seattle, I believe.
Seattle.
Yeah.
It's okay to do that? You can take a character that's in the public domain and create a story for that character?
Sure. I recently, yeah,
I guess.
I recently wrote a Shakespearean version of The Godfather. I took the movie The Godfather and redid it in iambic pentameter with all these Shakespearean hallmarks.
My God.
Where will
And
that be played?
It was it's played quite a bit already. I don't know if we'll do it again in town here. It was last fall, but it did very similar to what Katie Forget's doing. Took very highly recognizable pieces of, in my case, all these Shakespeare plays, and mixed it with an existing piece of popular culture. So she's taken hallmarks from Sherlock Holmes and then mixed in Oscar Wilde, who people know something about separately from Sherlock Holmes, but you can mix them, and Lily
Similar
Langtry,
time,
which is
yeah.
she's lesser known, but she was a real person, and you know, it's very clever what she's done.
The cast is local?
Yes, oh yeah.
Okay. But professional?
Yeah, we have, Minneapolis is second only to New York for amount of theaters per capita, I think they say. And the pool of talent here is absolutely equal to New York, Chicago, Seattle, anywhere else you'll go. So we have lots of professional actors that are very, very accomplished.
Yet another reason to feel proud about where we live.
Yeah.
I think that's probably true.
Holmes, I read once, is the most widely recognized literary figure in the world.
Really?
That's what I read.
I believe you.
I think I read it on Wikipedia.
Oh, well, there.
How do you take a character that everybody has an idea about already and do something different? Or do you even worry about doing something different when you're doing a play like this?
We think about it, yes.
Do you worry about getting it right?
Well, we do. This has been a big topic of conversation in our rehearsals. Steve Hendrickson, who played Sherlock Holmes for Park Square about 2 years ago, and they did. I can't remember what it was. It was the last story and something else.
Final, yeah. That's
And
right.
so that was more of a faithful, like, this is just Sherlock Holmes from this particular story.
Okay.
And they got everything on the mantelpiece had to be right, and everything was exactly right because they knew people would be scrutinizing this. Well, because Katie Forget has invented this alternate reality for Sherlock. It's not a real story from the canon. It gives us an enormous amount of freedom to say, well, we're actually doing an impression of Sherlock. So how far do we get away from that, and how close do we get? And what we've kind of begun to, we've only been in rehearsal a week, but we're starting to find that the play toes the line of parody almost, intentionally. She has written a thing that's got a very tongue-in-cheek kind of like winking quality to it. So our challenge in rehearsal is how much do you bring that into your characterization so that it's almost that of Sherlock, but we keep him real too at the same time. So it's become very fun for Steve and for all of us to work that out.
And you're gonna hear from the audience who are going to be looking for the Sherlock Holmes tells. Aren't they?
Yeah. Oh,
Well,
and he's
you
got
know,
him. He's yeah.
Is Watson a smart man in this, or is he a bumbler?
He's written. That's a good question because he's he's perceived both ways from these movies and things.
Right, but not the original. The original, he
No,
was a very
right.
smart
Well, he's a
biographer.
doctor,
Right.
and he's the author of all the stuff. That's remains to be seen how far. It's another guy named Steve is playing Watson, Steve Lewis. How far we're going to go with it's more dramatically interesting to have them be quite opposite, and especially in a show that is largely comic. I mean, ours is largely comic. To have them be a little bit like Big and Little, and that kind of thing. But we don't want him to seem like bumbling at all.
Okay. That bugs me when I.
Yeah, we don't want
Nigel
that.
Bruce did that.
That's what he
Did
did.
that
It
a
was
lot,
the Basil Rathbone. movies,
Steve is doing a very good. Steve Lewis Watson is doing a very good job of riding this line very close, so that you get the feeling he's going. I'm very bright, but that Sherlock, well, he's brilliant.
Okay, that's cool.
We're